everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Voices of Integrity and CPN Christian Professional Network. My name is Mark Boersman. I'll be your guest interviewer for today. And today we have a most interesting guest that I think you'll all find he's an interesting guy with an interesting background. Terry, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, history, and your vision for small church.
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, Mark. Thanks for the invite. Excited to be here this morning. A little bit about me. Well, I grew up in the cornfields of Iowa, and so small town kid from way back there. Met the love of my life in college. We have two kids, two daughters, two son-in-laws, 6 grandkids, and been in ministry for a long time. I'm kind of a thrill seeker, so I love anything that has adventure behind it. And so I've jumped out of airplanes. I've been to the Amazon jungle. I've driven a NASCAR around the Daytona International Speedway at 142 miles an hour. Just hiked the Grand Canyon, all kinds of stuff like that. And Indiana Jones is my guy, right? So the new movie just came out, and I just went and saw it last Saturday. And so I'm kind of a high energy, love life, love adventure kind of a person. And God called me graciously into his ministry years ago when I was in college. And I'm working on going almost 40 years in ministry now, and spent first 12 years in youth ministry in Indianapolis, Indiana, and then 2 years as an associate in Columbus, Ohio. And then God moved me to small town America, Crawfordsville, Indiana, a community of about 15,000 people in west central Indiana. And this summer will be 25 years that I've been here in Crawfordsville as the lead pastor.
Nice. So you know a thing or two about pastoring and about churches and building things and taking things that we're struggling in a small church and being able to turn it into something that's blessed many, many people. What is your vision for Small Church USA, Terry?
Yeah, so our vision for Small Church USA really is to have a financially viable resource for small hurting churches. And there's a lot of big consulting firms out there that these small struggling pastors and churches really can't afford to engage with. And so one of our missions, and I can share if you want me to a little bit about what God did here in Crawfordsville,
Sure.
kind of led to all of that. But one of our missions is we want to help these churches that don't feel like they have a resource that they can turn to.
Got it. Why do you think that's so important, Terry?
Yeah, just demographically, the church is hurting today. Statistics would say probably 85% of the churches in America are stagnant, status quo, in decline. And the pastors that we work with, I don't think that they don't want to do something. They're just not sure what to do. And so statistically, 91% of all of the communities in the United States of America have a population of 15,000 people or less. And so the fabric of our country is really small towns filled with small churches. And these small communities all need a good gospel presence in these communities for the kingdom impact.
Yeah, and I, 2.5 minutes into the interview, I'm thinking, yeah, this is going to be a multi. We're going to have more than one podcast with Terry. I have a feeling, because there's so much with my dad being a pastor and a missionary here in the U.S. and starting 5 churches. So I grew up in small town, USA too. Mm-hmm. And my dad went the route of going into small towns and really starting something from nothing. So I've been through that experience. It was interesting because we went to James McDonald's church, and we were part of one of his first one with Ron Zappia, actually, the first church plant that they had from the church. And then we went over to Aurora, Illinois. And I remember James coming out and speaking and saying, you guys are all part of the beginning and the start. And this is where it all, and I'm looking around and there's like 400 people there and they've got a building. And he's like, you're at the grassroots. I'm like, this doesn't, my grassroots was going out and finding property with my dad, perking it, trying to sell it, trying to go ahead and do it, having people come into the home. And and then we go into the school, and then my mom says, if all the people stayed that said they wish they had a youth program, they wish they had this and this, if all the people that came and left had stayed, we'd have all those programs, but we only have 10 people here. So, with that being my roots, I have a huge heart, for small churches and pastors. And it's like, I commend you and for providing resources and having a heart for them, because I think that there's a lot of resources that go into big churches. And I think God uses big and medium and small. I think he uses all of them. But I think the small churches, that's where, as an 18-year-old, my dad says, Mark, I'd like you to be on the deacon board. I'm like, Dad, I'm not even married. Doesn't matter, son. You're engaged, is that counts. Or when I get to lead music or be the treasurer. I mean, there's so many of those things in small churches that you get put into things that really you don't know what you're doing and you don't do it well, honestly. But they serve you well, and they change your life. And so there's a huge heart I have for small churches as well. Terry, what do you think, some of the biggest challenges that pastors are facing today from your personal experience and then from working with pastors, all over the country?
Yeah, well, can I just share kind of how small church got started?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
There, because that's going to tie into some of these
Yep.
other questions I think you're going to have. So in 1998, we came to Crawfordsville, a small struggling church that had been in steady decline for 10 years. It was very unhealthy. And when we came, there were 20 elderly people left. The average age was 64 years old. There were 2 men, no kids, and the rest were elderly ladies. And but they didn't want their church to die. And that I think is very significant. And we didn't know what we were doing, really. It was really before the whole revitalization word was ever even a word in church circles. And so we just started working and praying and trusting God and trying things and made mistakes and had a few successes and all of that. And if you fast forward 24 years down the road, our church today runs about 1,000 people on Sunday, and God has done immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. And I love Galatians 6:14 that says, may I never boast in anything other than the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. And the glory and the spotlight always goes to him. But in those 24 years, we had a lot of pastors and churches reach out to us saying, how did you do the revitalization? Can you help us? And we did with the bandwidth that we had, which wasn't much when you're leading a church of 1,000 people. But when a couple of years ago, we started succession planning for me and thinking about how do we hand the church to the next generation. And we brought in a next generation pastor. And over a course of a year, we did a transition very intentionally of handing the church off. And part of that was, for me, was that my wife and I started this ministry called Small Church USA so that we could, in a very intentional way, on a much broader scale, help pastors and churches in these small communities and struggling places that go, hey, I want help. I'm just not sure where to turn. And I need somebody that understands my context. And so I'm able to say to pastors, hey, if you're in a church from 20 to 1,000, I get where you are. And if you've been in a metropolitan city, I get that. If you've been in small town America, I get that too. And so God has given us a broad range of ministry experiences and context to be able to understand and relate to guys where they are today. So that's kind of the history. And then, what is, what's the biggest challenges that guys are facing today? I really think it's this. We're working with pastors from 14 different states across the country right now. And, COVID changed our world and it changed churches. And I think in the midst of all of that, it didn't matter what decisions you were making as a pastor. It was going to be a no-win situation that you were going to be in. And I think right now there is just a lot of noise, and it's hard to filter through the noise to stay focused on the priorities. And I think pastors are just really discouraged right now. Churches took a big hit over COVID. And I just saw a statistic out of the Southern Baptist Convention last week that their average church attendance prior to COVID and post-COVID is down 27.54%. And so I think there's just a lot of discouragement and a lot of noise. And how do we get refocused and start moving forward in a positive direction? That's what I'm seeing.
Interesting. So Terry, do you think it's harder or worse now than it's been in the past for pastors?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the world's getting crazier all the time, obviously, but I think COVID put us all into a realm of something that we'd never experienced, and nobody we've ever talked to had experienced before going through something like that. So I think it's just a completely different paradigm than we've looked at before. And then how do you adjust to the new paradigm? I think that's what the challenge is.
So, there was a small town that I was invited to participate with, probably 10 of the pastors from all different denominations in the town. And I went to the group for a year, and my heart just broke for them. One of the gentlemen went ahead and who knew all the pastors and did a lot of connections and stuff. He said, 75%, he says, I know every one of the pastors in the area, and 75% of the pastors either want to get out of ministry or they want to leave their church.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't. They don't know what else to do other than ministry. Or they can't find another church. And I thought, boy, if you got 75% of the churches in a community where the pastor doesn't really want to be there, that's gotta take a toll, on the pastor, and the churches and the community.
Yeah. Yep. For sure it does. And, so many of these churches, especially the ones we're working with, solo pastors or bivocational pastors. So there's already a loneliness there because you're not on a team, you're not around people. And the isolation's really dangerous for anybody. It's very unhealthy. And one of the things we work on is what's it look like to be a healthy pastor, that isn't discouraged and isn't ready to throw in the towel and is actually excited and can energize his church forward because he has some energy to move forward with all of that. I love Romans 12:8 that says right in the middle of this spiritual gift passage, it says the one who leads with zeal, and leadership has to come with some zeal. And if the leader loses the zeal, so does the church. And so if you get the pastors discouraged, that certainly, as you just mentioned, has a ripple effect to the church, to the community, to the families, all of those things.
It seems like you either spiral up, or spiral down.
Yes.
You don't really stay. You're either growing or dying. That's what it is. So what do you think the core is? What do you think the core is of that?
Of the discouragement?
I guess so.
Well, so, okay. I think a lot of pastors, they come out of Bible college and seminary and all of that. They're taught how to study their Bible. They're taught how to preach, how to teach. But one of the things, and I think our seminaries are probably doing a better job of this, but I know like when I went through my 4 years of Bible college, I didn't have one class on leadership. And so I was never taught how to lead anything. How do you lead a deacon's meeting? How do you lead a business meeting? How do you lead a budget meeting? How do you lead, anything? And so we have guys that are coming out of our Bible colleges and seminaries that are eager and excited and have this zeal to serve the Lord, but I'm not sure that they were fully equipped to actually lead a church, which in a lot of aspects is a ministry, but it's also a business. And so how do you effectively lead that? And so I think guys are just stuck because they just aren't sure leadership wise how to organizationally and personally grow in those things to keep a church organized and moving forward, especially when you hit a crisis. And I think what COVID did was we saw this, anything that was unhealthy, including people, COVID exasperated that, and anything that was unhealthy, a lot of those things didn't make it. And churches that were unhealthy when COVID hit, I think it exasperated that to the place where unhealthy things over a period of time, if they don't change, eventually die. And I think that's had the impact on churches that way too, that were unhealthy. It just exasperated that process for them.
So if you're listening, as you're listening to this, think about other pastors that might benefit from this conversation, and share that, share the podcast with them. And then business people too. So 97% of all business owners, businessmen, women go out of business within 7 years. So my dad was a pastor. I knew as a young kid that I was, called to be a businessman. I mean, it's kind of interesting. My dad said, he went to Faith Baptist Bible College, which is where you went and met your wife, I believe, and I met my wife too. And so, great college to meet great women.
Amen to that.
Amen. And he said, I never really felt God's calling to be a pastor. And, I don't know what that meant exactly, growing up as a kid, but there's no question I felt the calling to be in business. And, we've had in our business, we've had over 45, 55 people come to Christ through our business. And I guess Barna, he says that the average church in America is only seeing one salvation every other year. And it's like, wow, that's not going to work out so well. So for business people, Terry, business owners, business leaders, what suggestions would you have? I mean, they're kind of dying too. I mean, it's like a nuclear bomb. It just wham, it's just ripple through everything. Like they're having a hard time keeping their head above water too. Mm-hmm. So, what recommendations or suggestions would you give for business, men and women, business owners to encourage their pastor, and then pastors to encourage the business people?
Yeah. I think probably more than ever, I think about that Ecclesiastes verse, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, where it talks about two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. And a cord of three strands is not quickly broken. And I think the Christian community right now, we need to understand that we're better together and we need each other, maybe more than we ever have before. And so I think the church, to be healthy, and again, I think that's the key for any church, is it healthy? Because healthy things will be able to work through problems and difficulties and manage things well, have good relationships. And so I think we're better together when we understand the roles that we have, that the business people need the pastors and need the church and the pastor needs the business people. I think it goes both ways. because God has called us all to be different and do different things. Ephesians 2:10, we're God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And that's within the church and that's without of the church. He didn't wire us all the same. And so I think we need to rely on each other and have the kind of relationships where we can have good, honest conversations with each other, and work together for the betterment of the kingdom. And I think sometimes we get an earthly view of what I'm doing. I'm really building my kingdom, but I don't have the big kingdom view in mind. And I think that big kingdom view is very important, regardless of what God has called us to do in life.
So, I do, and have done probably for over 15 years, I don't know, 10 to 15 webinars or podcasts a week. So I've done thousands of them in all different venues at all different topics and stuff like that. And what's interesting is on a number of the Christian Professional Network ones that I've done, they asked me to, be a facilitator, a guest facilitator. I'm always happy to do that. But it's interesting because a lot of the ones that are in the Christian world, the Christians actually, there's more non-Christians that participate than Christians. And so I'm curious, I'm like, okay, this is a Christian Professional Network. And most of you that are on, you're not Christians. Like, I'm just curious, like, why do you show up? And they're like, without questions, they say, the number one thing, probably 80 to 90% of the time, they say, I feel comfortable where I can ask questions here that I can't ask in the church. So when you say honest conversations, it triggers something to me where it seems like, it's very hard for people to have honest conversations. And maybe, I don't know if you found this to be true, maybe business owners even more so than not. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think so one of my good friends heads an organization called Integris Leadership. His name's Lyle Wells. The phrase that I got from him was, feedback is the breakfast of champions. And to create a culture of feedback where you can have good dialogue and ask questions and answer questions, that's a culture issue for any organization, whether it's a church or a family or a business or whatever. It's all about culture. And leaders shape culture by default or design, right? And it all depends on who's leading the organization. So if you create a culture by design that is, hey, feedback helps us get better. Asking questions helps us get better. Having good, honest conversations helps us get better. And if you create that culture, then I think that's where all of that comes out of. And the culture's got to be a culture of what I call lots of light and no heat, right? So let's not be afraid to even talk about hard things, but let's try not to put the emotion into it. And so that we can really work through things and just continue to get better all the time as we can for the sake of the kingdom. So for me, it's a leadership issue that affects the culture of whatever it is, church, family, organization, business, whatever.
And this is where I think that, this podcast, I think anybody in the church would benefit from it. I think pastors and business owners, they have so much. Being a pastor's kid my whole life, like, you see a lot of stuff, like, as a kid, a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so you see where I'm at, faith, freshman year in college, and I get a call from my parents and they say, yeah, Mark, just want to let you know that, the marshals have decided that they're not going to continue to attend church. And my heart just absolutely broke for my parents. Like it just broke because I knew that the marshals were, he was the chairman of the deacon board. He was a key leader in the church. He went ahead and, I figured they probably gave a good amount of money. And I'm like, and I think that is one of the major reasons that I went 1 year, found an amazing wife where we've been married for 38 years and 7 kids and 8 grandkids. And so I went there, met my wife, came back, and for the next 20 plus years, so came back to the church. And I think it was out of compassion. A large reason was out of compassion for my mom and dad, where I said, they're alone. Like they are so alone. They are like, there's just nobody. And my mom, she said, Mark, you and Roseanne and the kids, you guys have brought so many like young people, like often it's like you say, it's like young families. They like to be around other young families. And if you don't have one, man, it's hard to build anything from it. And so any other closing thought? Terry, I think we got to 2 questions of the 10. So we have to do another one for sure. I know that there will be a lot of people that will be blessed by this. And again, if you're listening and you're a pastor, share this not only with other pastors, but share it with your business people. Because we have a lot more in common than we realize. I mean, we really, really do. A friend of mine, Dr. Kane, who is the president of Judson University in the Chicago area, I was talking to him one day, and he said, I said, what's your biggest challenge that you're facing as a president of a pretty major Christian university? And he said, low morale. So he had 90 professors who had their doctorates. So these are highly educated, like, spiritual leaders and teachers and training future pastors. And I remember at the time we had 4 teenagers. Our oldest were 4 teenagers. And I have a business. I'm an international speaker and author. So trying to, being very active in the church, very active, trying to keep my business alive, have 7 kids and the 4 oldest are teenagers. And I'm like drowning. And so, my teenagers, I'm like, they have low morale too. And I thought I had the answer for their low morale. I'm like, it's not really that complicated on why my kids have low morale, I thought. So I thought, well, maybe Dr. Kane has some super, super awesome wisdom, some insight that I could pull from him and take home and apply. And I said, so Dr. Kane, like, why is there low morale? He said, well, Mark, he said, we haven't had to lay anybody off, but it's been tight. And so we're about, 15% understaffed. I'm like, okay. And then he said, and, we've cut back everybody's pay by 10%. We cut back their work by 10%, but we cut back all their pay by 10%. And immediately I thought, oh my goodness, like these 90 professors who have their PhD in theology, and they have the same challenge my kids have. I mean, it's the same thing. And so being a business guy and coaching and mentoring business people, I've had business owners that have lost 90% of their income and they've had to double their work. And, in business, it's pretty straightforward. You don't have low morale. If you do, you die. It's really simple. And then you go get a real job. And I think that might be the biggest fear of any business owner, especially an entrepreneur. It's like, I would rather die in the forest than live in the zoo. And so I'm like, we have, as pastors and as business owners, we have so many similar things. Like we could come together and do so much more for the kingdom. I mean, Paul, he's a business guy. Like he was a business guy. He understood business. So look forward to having you back as a guest again, Terry. I think we have so many things that we could share that would help and bless pastors and laity and business owners as well. If you're listening to the rebroadcast of this, you have any questions, feel free to connect with the individual who invited you to participate in today's session, or you can call toll free 888-230-2300. That's 888-230-2300. Outside the U.S., 630-393-9909. If you'd like to check out Small Church, go to the website smallchurchusa.com. That's smallchurchusa.com. And Terry, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And everybody, always remember we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. God bless and have an amazing day. Bye-bye.